Hi, I'm Tuffy Epstein. I was born August 17th, 1935, the second son of Harry and Jenny Epstein. I had an older brother who's 3 years older than I have an older brother who is 3 years older than me. His name is Ira Epstein. He presently lives in California. And I was born in what is, until recent years, was Booth Memorial Hospital, which I understand was the Salvation Army Hospital. But at the time I was born there, it was not a Salvation Army hospital. It was a regular hospital that people went to at the time. And my parents at that time lived on 27th and Maple in Omaha, behind a grocery store, a small store, and it's now been taken over by the by Interstate 480, I guess. And my earliest memory is when I must have been 2.5 or 3 years old. I remember an apple tree outside of my bedroom, and I was getting dressed and marveling at the size of the apples. I couldn't have been more than 3, because when I was 3, we moved to a new house, which I actually remember moving into, on 20th and Martha. And that was another uh, house up behind a grocery store. And we lived there until, I was probably about 14 years old. In fact, that's when we moved, is when I was 14. I have a younger brother, Alan, who was born in 1941, and a sister, Gloria, who was born in 1946. They're both still living in, Gloria lives in Omaha, and my younger brother lives in Kansas City. And I have to think here. I remember the start of the Second World War in December 7th, 1941. It was a Sunday afternoon, and it's all very vivid in my memory still. Uh, when I was 7 years old, uh, my mother got an inspiration somewhere that I would be a wonderful guitar player and start giving me guitar lessons. And I was forever losing picks and losing bars and losing anything I could possibly lose to keep from having to take guitar lessons, because I hated guitar. And my older brother Ira and I used to entertain a lot. He would play the accordion and I would sing. And he was an excellent musician, but anything he would play as fast as he could possibly play, whether it was supposed to be fast or slow. And I would try to keep up singing, and everyone thought we were just wonderful, but I look back, and being a professional musician now, I think it probably wasn't very good. And but in when I was about 7 or 8 years old, Ira and I had been entertaining on local USO tours, and someone had a trumpet there. And I picked up the trumpet and I started blowing it, and my mother was really amazed. She was also amazed at the amount of noise I made, and she didn't want anything that loud in the house, so she started giving me saxophone lessons, which I also fought tooth and nail until I was about 11 or 12 years old. She used to have to almost beat me to get me to practice. Then after I was 11 or 12, she used to have to almost beat me to keep me from practicing, because I decided I really did like it, and that's how I was going to earn my living someday. And I did. Um, let's see, when I was about 11 and a half, uh, we started having a man, I think his name was Rabbi Rothman, come to the house to train me for my bar mitzvah, and it was something I never did take too seriously at the time. Uh, my grandparents were fairly religious, and we used to visit with them. In fact, it was kind of a neat thing when I was a kid, because we lived on 20th and Martha, which was close to South Omaha, and the whole rest of the family lived around the projects or somewhere in that area, and we used to go spend all our spare time with them, to the point where I felt they were my family as much as my family was my family. And I had cousins on both sides of the family there, and both sets of grandparents, and this was what is now the Near North Side in Omaha. And we used to play football, and we had just really an awful lot of fun in that part of the city that we didn't seem to have in our own neighborhood. Um, when I was 13, I had my bar mitzvah, and it was on a Thursday morning, and I remember my father and I got on the streetcar and went to the shul on 24th and Nicholas, and I did my bar mitzvah, and then I got back on the streetcar and went home, and he got on the streetcar and went to work wherever he was working at the time, which I don't remember. Then when I was 14, I started Central High School, and immediately fell into the music scene there, and had started playing some jazz at the time, and and Ira and I had always played some jazz. In fact, quite often when I was 9, 10, 11 years old, and 12, all the way up until the time when he moved away to go to college, we couldn't talk to each other very much, but he would sit down at the piano and play, and we'd have wonderful jam sessions. We'd go to play any tunes that we knew in all 12 keys, one right after the other, which has really been wonderful training for me that I couldn't have gotten from any music teacher. It was just something that was there. It was really neat. I did have some good teachers, but what I learned on my own was probably just as important. Let's see, when I was 16, I played my first professional job, and that was on a New Year's Eve. It would be 1951, and it was for Betty Denenberg's wedding, and we had a 5-piece group, and it was paid $35 for the whole group. And afterwards, the rabbi had left some wine on behind the bima, and it was at the Paxton Hotel, so it was a makeshift bima, of course. But the group managed to finish the wine, and then a couple of us, one of who is a prominent attorney in town, I'll not mention right now, but went across the street to the town theater and watched porno flicks until 3 in the morning. And after that, I started actually playing professionally and joined the union that summer. And my first job with playing was supposed to have been with the Dick Brown Orchestra in St. Joe, Missouri, the Frog Hop Ballroom, and it was an 8-piece group, and there were 8 of us riding in a 1942 Pontiac station wagon. And about halfway there, we blew a rod and had to push the car all the way to the job. Got there, and another band was playing, so we got back in the car and came back to Omaha, and that was my very first professional job. The next week, we were supposed to play in Wall Lake, Iowa with the same group, and we got in the car, and on the way up, we had 4 blowouts, one right after another. Finally got there at 11 o'clock and played half a job, so I made $5, and I still became a professional musician. Who's crazy? Then after that, I went, finished high school, of course, and with some very, very excellent training. My high school band director was really my idol for a long time. And it was because of him that I decided I was going to be a music educator.
Tuffy, let's go back to grade school. Can you tell me about your time in grade school?
Oh, yeah, sure. When I was in grade school, I remember quite a few things. I'm sorry I didn't get there. I remember my kindergarten teachers was Miss Van Brunt, and I used to love to sit with a book, and I know I was just acting like I was reading because I had been read to, and I would act as if I was reading, but I really wasn't reading. I just memorized the book that was in front of me, and everyone thought that was wonderful. That was Miss Van Brunt, and then I forget, Miss Joy was my first grade teacher, and I loved first grade because I was really, really learning how to read. And in second grade, I was a problem child. I remember Miss Andrews actually smacking me across the face and saying, "You're nothing like your big brother." And thank heaven she was right. I really have never been much like my big brother. But I managed to survive her, and then all the rest of my teachers clear through school were really wonderful to me, and I love them. Uh, I had a seventh grade teacher who had been well, let's say a reformed music teacher, but she was teaching seventh grade, and she would not let anyone out of her seventh grade class if they couldn't accompany at least one song on piano for the whole class. And with, at that time, 32 to 35 kids in a class, I look back, and she must have really been some kind of genius teacher. She was really good. And my whole grade school career was at Castelar Grade School. Uh, Ira and I, my older brother, were the only two Jewish kids there. Most of the time, Sherman Posca was there for a few years, but that was kind of off and on. But there were just the two of us, and there were times when I would actually get chased home from school, being called a dirty Jew, and I was not afraid to turn around and fight if I felt like it. But I didn't fight an awful lot. My next door neighbor and I used to fight all the time, and he was really my best friend in school anyway. And he was here in Omaha just last year. He just retired from running a winery in Germany. Let's see what else about grade school. Can't think about too much else. I'd like to tell you a little bit about my mother and my father. First of all, their relationship for the time was very unique in that my father was not a great businessman, but always felt he should be in business. My mother was a phenomenal businesswoman. Um, my father would usually work away from the store, and my mother ran the store. And she was a little woman. She was only about 4'7", maybe 4'8", and she always carried 200 pounds or more. I can never remember her weighing less than 200. But she could walk up to a sack of potatoes and grab it by the ears and just flip it over her shoulders like it was nothing. So she was pretty sturdy Russian peasant stock. But she had her own ways, and it's really kind of funny in retrospect because my brother thinks that she was the most wonderful thing that happened, and I never agreed. I really admired my father more. My father was always encouraging. He was not a real strong person, and that was really the only fault I could have in him. He loved us, and he was never afraid. About my mother especially, because I think I knew more about her background than my father's, but their backgrounds were similar. Um, my mother's father came to the United States in about 1907, I believe, and they lived in Brooklyn, New York, and he really had no special skills, but he was kind of a trash collector at one time, and he also had some experience in rebuilding furniture, and I think that's why they had some connections here in Omaha, and he came here and he did rebuild furniture, and he also he had a horse I recall hearing about, and they lived on 26th and Seward, and my grandfather was really a tough old bird, and by today's standards, I think maybe he would have been considered a little bit abusive. My grandmother was very weak, and my grandmother on my mother's side was very weak and seemed to always be afraid of everything. Um, my father's father I never knew as being a well man, and my father's mother passed away when my father was, I think, 8 or 9 years old. Um, but my grandfather on my father's side was never well. He had worked at Grant Battery, and I believe he had suffered most of his life from lead poisoning. At least that's the impression I got. And I was never close to him as a grandfather. My grandfather Joe, my mother's father, was quite a grandfather and loved having his kids around. And it was kind of a weird thing. Whenever we'd go over visiting on a weekend afternoon, he would always have a whole container of matzo balls in the refrigerator, and he'd always offer us cold matzo balls. And I knew he cooked them himself because I don't remember my grandmother cooking. Um, but that was kind of a neat thing. Um, they came to Omaha. I guess my father's family came in 1907 and 1904, and well, one was in 1904, 1907. I don't know which was which. And they got married in 1929, right during the Depression. And one of the reasons they got married is because my father had a job for Paxson and Gallagher, working the same job for many, many years. And so they figured that he was pretty secure in his job, so they could afford to get married. And let's see. My mother's maiden name was Kosowski, which is quite a mouthful to say and even more difficult to spell, I think, and which is part of the reason I believe that she had two brothers, both of who changed their name to Koster, except one was spelled Koster, the other one was spelled Koester. And Jack Koster, which was my mother's favorite brother, was director of the meat division of the OPA, which is the Office of Price Administration in the Second World War. And he was actually stationed in Washington. And he was the first of either side of the family to actually get a college degree. He had a degree in pharmacy. And they lived in Washington through the war. And he had two children, which I have now lost track of, but they were close cousins at the time. And we used to go to Washington and visit them. The other Coaster was Gary, and he ran away, of all things, he ran away with the circus when he was 14 years old and collected all kinds of skills while he was with the circus. And I remember him moving back to Omaha, and it was shortly after the war. I think he had actually been in the service in the war. But he moved back to Omaha shortly after the war, and he went to work for Bernstein Furniture for a while. Then after that, they started restoring the Orpheum Theater, and he restored all the chandeliers and was on the staff at the Orpheum until he died. He was really a neat guy and one of my favorite people. When I first started teaching in Carson, Iowa, he talked me into joining the Masons there because he had been a Mason, and he was just real proud that his nephew was a Mason, and we became quite close. My mother also had a sister, Rose Fredkin, and Aunt Rose was kind of a go-getter. She was a business lady, and she'd do anything, sell anybody. I think if she could get any money for it, I think she'd sell her own mother to make a few cents. She was really a sharp lady, but really, really bitter and very, very tough. There's no other way to say it. And but everyone thought that Uncle Jack was the greatest thing that ever lived. But he was married. This is a good transition. He was married to my father's baby sister, Doris, so that Dora and Jack's kids were my double first cousins, because they'd have been, no matter who they were, one parent was, I'd still be their cousin on one side or the other. And we were very close with them too, even though they did live in Washington. And that side of the family, my father's side, it's a little bit larger and a little bit hard to keep track of. My father was the oldest child, and I could never get out of him exactly when he quit school, because every time I would talk to him, he had done a different thing in a different grade, and I really don't know whether he quit after 8th grade or whether he went through high school, but he didn't talk about it very much. He read, and he loved to read. He was definitely no fool. I think probably in school he was a discipline problem. He used to tell us that he and his friends would catch one of the neighborhood guys in his wagon at the top of a hill and sleeping in the wagon, and they shoved the wagon down the hill without waking the guy up. Things like that. He must have been quite a hellion when he was a kid. Um, but he was the oldest, and then right after him was my Aunt Libby, and Aunt Libby was a very interesting person in that she was married and divorced, and then married another guy, and this other guy had been a widower and had, I guess it was 3 sons, who we considered our first cousin, even though they weren't really related. And they were all neat guys. In fact, I have kept in contact with them, and their youngest, I guess he was the youngest son, yes, Ed, is now quite a prominent artist in San Francisco, and we have contacted him quite a few times when we've been on the West Coast visiting with our daughter. Um, then after Libby, there was my Uncle Sam, and Uncle Sam was the first one on the Epstein side of the family to completely finish an education. He was an accountant and managed to be a fairly solid citizen in most ways, so far as I know. And after Sam was Aaron, and Aaron was probably my favorite uncle on either side of the family. He was a very, very lovable person, and everyone liked him wherever he went, and he was a great athlete. But there are pictures of he, and I think it was my Uncle Sam, selling papers in downtown Omaha when they were like really little, like 7 and 8 years old. So they scuffled. But I remember my Uncle Aaron as being a bread man. He worked for Peter Pan Bread Company and drove a bread truck for years, and I just thought that was the neatest job. Um, anyway, that was my Uncle Aaron, and then the baby of that family was my Aunt Edith. And I remember Aunt Edith when she was dating, and she was a very popular girl. She must have been 18 to 22 or 23 years old. And she finally married Al Goldstein, who was here in Nebraska. He was from Philadelphia originally, and he was in the Air Force, and he was stationed at a small air base in Fairbury, Nebraska. And they had gotten fixed up by someone, and he ended up settling here and being in the grocery business in Omaha. And they had 5 daughters. Um, I forgot my Uncle Morty. He was in family order, I believe, between Libby and Sam. And Uncle Maury, in all his adult life, worked for Vinger Tobacco and Candy Company. And he had 2 children, both of which I'm still quite friendly with. And one of them became a dentist, the other one married a doctor and lives on the West Coast. Maury's wife was Molly. And Molly was kind of an enigma to me because our house was always such a shambles, and we would, if there was company coming, we'd try to put things in neat piles at least. And Molly always had a white carpet in the living room and the furniture covered in plastic, and heaven forbid you should sit on the furniture. And I never did quite figure out what it was for, but she was really the essence of crazy clean. And but Maury, on the other hand, was not like that at all. But he managed to put up with it, and now both of their children seem to be fairly normal and not messes or crazy clean. Okay, when I was in high school, I had first of all not had any contact with Judaism to speak of between my bar mitzvah and when I started high school, which was only about a year. But when I got to high school, I was all of a sudden thrown in with Jewish friends, and I made quite a few friends. And even as a freshman, I started going to Bethel Synagogue with different friends, and I fell in love with the place. And I decided that that was the kind of Jew I would like to be someday. But I had probably more Gentile friends than I did Jewish friends. And, well, in high school, I took the regular courses that everyone takes, and had met many, many neat kids being from South Omaha, and most of the kids at Central at that time were from West Omaha and Dundee. So it was a totally different type of thing that I was into. Uh, During my freshman year, uh, I did join AZA 1. No, I joined AZA 100 first because my older brother had been president of AZA 100 and had just graduated high school the year before I started. And so I joined AZA 100, and everyone expected me to follow in his footsteps, and that lasted about 2.5 months. And I joined AZA 1. Then I stayed in AZA 1 most of the way through high school. I was never an officer. I didn't care to be. Uh, I was I went to Beth Israel's youth group quite a bit, and was actually elected as an officer of that shortly before it fell apart. And I always felt it was through my leadership that it fell apart. But in reality, it was just that it was a different group of kids that were coming up, and they wanted to be active in other things. But the youth group was fun. And then the next year, after the Beth Israel youth group fell apart, I think it was Ronnie Grossman, if I recall, who was a friend of mine, and he suggested that I try going to Bethel with him. And that's when I started going to Bethel, and that's been my synagogue practically ever since. Um, my junior year in high school, I started playing professionally, so I didn't have really a lot of time for anything except playing. I would go with the band they'd pick me up about 4:15 in front of the school 2 or 3 nights a week, and we'd go to Cologne, South Dakota, or some hell-forsaken place, and play, and then I'd get back in time for marching band the next day. And everyone thought I was drinking or something, but I wasn't. I was just sleep deprived. But it didn't hurt me. In fact, that's the one thing I must say about my mother, that the fact that she allowed me to do it was to her credit, because as a parent now, I don't see how I could have ever let any of my children do the things I was doing and realize that they would come out the other side. It's a very, I would think, a very difficult thing to handle. But I did do it, and my older brother Ira also did the same thing before me. So we managed to survive and flourish. Senior year in high school was a real, I look back on it and I don't believe the things I did. I was already in the University of Nebraska at Omaha Orchestra, and I was preparing for a career and didn't know where I was going. During my senior year in high school, I auditioned for a scholarship at what was then the University of Omaha, and I got what was the Emma S. Smith's Music Scholarship. And at that time, there were 9 of us who received the scholarship. They were trying to build the music department up at the University of Omaha. And all 9 of us had already been professional musicians. We were from 4 different high schools. And we had all been friends. And we went to University of Omaha. And about the middle of my sophomore year, I became very disenchanted with the university, because I really wasn't learning anything. I was there just to make the department look better, because they would say that I was a graduate and look at the fine musicians we're turning out. And this was the case also with my friends, and we scattered during the beginning of my sophomore year to the middle of my sophomore year, and went all over. Colorado University. I went to Nebraska U at that time. A couple went to Chicago. We just scattered all over the country. And let's see, and I transferred down to the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. But when I was at University of Omaha, I was in the Air ROTC. And during that era, you had to be in the military of some kind, or that was just the way it was at the time. So I went down to Lincoln, and they decided that I was too heavy for ROTC, so I was assigned to PE for the handicapped. And I used to have just a lot of fun because first of all, it was a general PE course where they tried to do all kinds of PE for general life things. That's where I first played racquetball. It came out that year. But I used to do such things as play volleyball against people in wheelchairs and things like that. And I actually got an A out of PE not because I was so athletic, but because I was too fat for ROTC, and that's about it. And I was in the Nebraska University Band, of course, and that's afforded me a scholarship and helped me get through school. Also, about the time I hit campus, the ice show was coming to town, and the guy who normally played lead alto saxophone was ill, and they had heard that I could possibly do it, so I was hired to play the show. Did not have a tuxedo at all, so the director of the university orchestra, whose name just left me, gave me one of his old tuxedos and more or less sponsored me the whole time I was in school. He was really, Manny Wishnow was his name. And he was probably one of the better things that happened to me, and we were very, very good friends. I joined the same fraternity house my older brother was in, simply because he was on his way out, and I figured it wouldn't be too bad a thing, and it really wasn't. It was really a neat experience for me. I enjoyed the Sammy house when I was there, and it was also kind of a ticket to my playing fraternity dances, and it was a very commercially a sound thing for me to do at the time. It was definitely help, and I had a good little jazz group the whole time I was in college.
Who were some of your Sammy classmates?
My Sammy classmates, let's see, there was Bennett Alberts, my cousin Larry Epstein, who was Sammy's son. Let's see, golly, there's so many. Merle Potash had been there shortly before me. He was one of my older brother's friends. Cohn, I can't think of Cohn's first name right now. Anyway, there was quite a mob of us, really. And I can't think of any others right now.
Did you enjoy your time at the Sammys?
I enjoyed my time at the Sammy House. I had a great time, and Jerry Kolnick was my roommate. I learned how to be a person. I'm afraid I must admit I'd been kind of an animal up to that point, and they definitely took some of the edges off, and it was a help. It really was. And I had a good time with the Sammys. I remember the initiation, all the hazing and that stuff, and I swore that I would never encourage any of my children to do the same thing. And without encouragement one way or the other, my children never even would have thought of belonging to a fraternity or a sorority. They just weren't that type of people. During my sophomore year, I very seldom got back to Omaha because I had jobs in Lincoln, and during semester break, my friend Willie Ross, who was a flute major at the university, and she and I were very good friends, but we never would have thought of dating. It just wasn't that kind of relationship. During the semester break, she fixed me up with Helen Cook, who I had seen around and had talked to, but not very much, and it was more or less a blind date. And we have been together ever since, and we owe Willie at least convincing the two of us that we should go out. And so that was our shidduch, so to speak. And that was during my sophomore year. And we dated during my junior year, and got married right after my senior year. And then I had one more year because I had because of transferring schools, some more courses to take, so we stayed another year. And then went into the Air Force. Helen was an only daughter, which I found interesting because I had been anything but an only son. but she was the only daughter of a fairly prominent Denver family. Her mother and father, her mother's maiden name was Marylander, and her father's name was Morris Cook. And his family had owned a bathhouse in Denver, and they had come from someplace in Russia. I think it was near Kiev, and they owned a Russian bathhouse there, and then just did the same thing in Denver because the Platte River was accessible, and they could build their bathhouse by the river and use that water and so forth. But Morris, Helen's father, was loved to fish, and he had all kinds of. It seems like he must have had 20 or 30 nephews that just idolized him, and his only child was Helen. And of course, she was the apple of their eye, and anything that Helen wanted, they would give her. When it came time for her to go to school, she had a cousin who had married a Lincoln boy, and she wanted to go away to school because she felt that would be the best thing, since she was an only child, and she felt she should be a little bit independent, and I'm awful glad she did, of course. But she came to the University of Nebraska to be near her cousin, and she joined the SDT house, and was really not that near her cousin any time because she was very, very busy and did every activity imaginable for a freshman and sophomore girl. And we got married during her right after her sophomore year, and she didn't get back to school until probably 25 years later. We got married July 7th, 1957 in Denver, and it was at the Hebrew Educational Alliance on 15th and Stewart in Denver. No, 16th and Stewart in Denver. And I remember the wedding. We had 180 people. I'd better not forget the wedding, but we had 180 people there, and we had absolutely no control over the wedding at all. Helen's mother planned the whole thing. They hired the band. I would have probably hired a different band. They had a harp playing for the wedding itself. I'm not sure I would have had a harp, but no one asked me. And it was really a neat wedding, though. It was absolutely lovely. And then we lived one more year in Lincoln, and after Lincoln, I joined the Air Force, and we moved to Denver. After I graduated college, I did, of course, then, because of the way people thought at that time, I had responsibility. I had a wife that I had to take care of, and I wanted to get a teaching job in Denver or in that area so that Helen could be near her parents, because we both felt, in retrospect, it felt wrongly that they were getting old and they wouldn't have that much time to enjoy us, our grandchildren, or anything else, so we wanted to live there. And I could not get a teaching job in Denver, so I had a friend who was in the Air Force Academy Band, which was stationed right outside of Denver, and he thought that I would be a pretty good candidate for that. So I was living in Denver already a little bit. I mean, we had moved from Lincoln and were kind of nowhere, just waiting for me to get a job. And I auditioned for the Air Force Academy Band and was accepted in June. And then we decided that I would, since we had been on a September to June schedule, that I would go in September. So I went back to the academy right before it was time for me to enlist, and they informed me that they had come up with a very stringent height and weight regulation, and I was both too short and too fat for the academy band. So about 8 blocks away was the Lowry Air Force Base Band, which was not quite as prestigious as the academy, of course, but I auditioned for that and was accepted. And I had a letter from the commanding general of the Nebraska National Guard saying that I had been a master sergeant in the National Guard and did not have to go to basic training. but the recruiter said I would have to at least go to Texas to get my official assignment, and so I did. Helen stayed with her parents in Denver, and I went to Texas, and it was 3 weeks before I could get anyone to read my letter saying that I already had my assignment. And when I finally got them to read it, I was out of basic training in a matter of about 2 hours. And then all I had to do is go to Denver, it would seem, except that they had no copy of my orders. So I had all my pay records frozen, and I was in Texas, and Helen was in Denver, and neither of us had any money coming in. And Helen managed to get a job in the stockbroker's office, so that was okay, but I had absolutely nothing coming in, and I used to stand outside of the building where they issued uniforms to the young kids 17 and 18 years old who just came in the service, and I was taking in ironing. And I was taking in enough ironing that I was able to send Helen $10 to $20 every week from what I was making ironing clothes as living in it was actually officers' quarters of people who had washed out of officers' candidate school. And that's where I was housed when I was in Texas. Then I got back, and I was doing, because I had a degree, and it was a small bass band with not really small, there were 50 people in it, but I was the only jazz tenor saxophone player in the band. So every time a shipment would come in for me specifically, the commanding officer would give it to somebody else because he wanted to keep me in Denver, which was just fine with me because that's where I wanted to be. After first I got all of my promotions as they would come, and you can just, at that time in your first enlistment, you could just get up to staff sergeant. And that's where I got to, and after about 24 months in the service, that's where I was, and that's where I stayed until I got out. And but in 1959, our first daughter was born, and that was Marty Jo. And she hates to be called Marty Jo now, and would really just soon people forget the Joe part. But Marty was born in '59 at Fitzsimmons Army Hospital, and that was very traumatic for Helen because Helen was in the hospital having the baby, and it would be time to have the baby, and she'd say, "Bring me my baby," and they'd say, "This is an Army hospital. You want your baby, you go get it." And that's the way it was. But Marty got a good start anyway in '59, and then we went on, and in 1961, our son Michael Andrew was born. And I'll never forget his bris because we were living in a duplex off base, and all the Jewish students on base came to our house for the bris. And one of them actually passed out because he just couldn't take watching, I guess. And it was quite memorable, however. And in 62, I got out of the service. But before I got out, I had, in about, May, maybe early June, I had signed a contract to be band director in Manzanola, Colorado. And I felt secure. It was about, 70 or 80 miles outside of Denver, but I figured that would be close enough that I could teach and play professionally. And one Sunday in late July, Helen and I went down to check out what our housing would be and found that they sold the only house in town, and we would have no place to live. And you talk about a depressed ride home, so we went back to Denver, and as we opened the door to our duplex, the phone was ringing. And I mean literally, it was as we opened the door, the phone was ringing. And it was the superintendent of schools in Carson, Iowa. And he said, he asked me if I was still looking for a teaching job because he heard that because I had applied a few places back here, but I had never applied in Carson. And so I broke my contract very quickly in Manzanola. The only rub was that the band was going to go to the Iowa State Fair on the 28th of August, and my discharge date was the 2nd of September. So I applied for an early out. See, I would have to get out the 15th. On the 7th of August, the band got orders to go to the World's Fair in Seattle. I said, well, I can't go. I'm frozen to the base. And the commanding officer said, you're important to us. You're going. And then once he said that, I said, well, okay. Helen has relatives in Seattle that I had never met. So I went on the 7th of August to Seattle, and I made every formation the band was supposed to make, but I spent absolutely the neatest week with Helen's relatives in Seattle who I had never met before, and we're still very friendly with them from that week. In fact, we just got back from Colorado where we attended one of their grandkids' bar mitzvahs. It's just a really, really neat relationship we have. And so I owe the Air Force that, if nothing else. And I got back the 14th of August, and my early out had gotten, and I had 5 days to clear the base. And in the Air Force, to get everything done in 5 days is really kind of a miracle. But I did, and we drove across country and got to Carson, Iowa on the 22nd of August. And I met with the kids the next morning and discovered that I had to drive them myself in a school bus to the state fair. And I had never driven a school bus. I got a crash course in it, failed my bus driving test 3 days in a row that I went up, and finally passed it on the 27th and took my first really teaching job, band, to the state fair without knowing anyone and having to drive the bus and very little parental chaperoning. I mean, it was really an interesting time for me, but I loved it. And I loved Carson, Iowa. We still have friends that we made while the 2 years we were in Carson, Iowa. And I was there in May of my second year. They started a building program in Omaha to build junior high school, so they needed quite a few teachers. And I was offered a job teaching in one of the junior high schools in Omaha. And just coincidentally, at the same time, my younger brother, who was attending Hart Conservatory in Hartford, Connecticut, I called him and told him I got a job in Omaha. He says, do what you can for me. My wife's pregnant. So there was a banner headline in the Carson Times, which was a funny newspaper anyway, but it said Epstein replaces Epstein, and my younger brother took my job. And he, like me, lasted 2 years. I could have lasted longer, of course, but better things happened, and he got a job offer in Grandview, Missouri after 2 years and moved. And we both still have very close ties to Carson, Iowa. We moved to Omaha in June of, golly, I have to think of the year. It'd be June of 1964, and I didn't know which junior high school I would have at that time. I did know that I would be a junior high school teacher, and that is something that I always wanted to do anyway. So I got Nathan Hale Junior High School, which is on 60th and Reddick, and at that time it was almost a country school. There was a few very wealthy neighborhoods to the north and to the west, and one to the very nice neighborhood to the east. And I had probably the best and most pleasant surprises I could have at that school, because the kids were all well trained. They were all mannerly. It was really a neat experience, and we would do music that I would only dream of doing when I was teaching in Carson at a high school. But we were at the junior high level, and I was very interested in forming a junior high jazz band. No one had been doing very many things like that. And I did, and for my first 4 years, I actually had tenure denied me because my supervisor in the Omaha Public Schools thought jazz was sinful music and that we shouldn't even introduce it in the schools up through the high school, let alone junior high school. I did finally win all those battles, though, and had a really nice jazz band. And about the time that things were really going great, the neighborhood started changing, and In a matter of, from 1971 to 1975, Nathan Hale went from being one of the most, really a very nice school to being the roughest school in Omaha by 1976. And I stayed on until 1988. So I had some very, very surprising and very, very tough experiences at Nathan Hale that really, when I started there in 1964, I would never think would happen. Um, but all the time that I was at Nathan Hale, well, since I've been in Omaha, I mean, from 1964, I started playing the Exarban shows, which was a pit orchestra type thing with Eddie Haddad. And I played in the Omaha Symphony at that time. And I also had my own group. And we had really, the Omaha Jazz Society had a big band, and we performed often. It's now been replaced by much younger people, and I'm no longer in it, but it's still basically the same type organization. Uh, Things were going along fairly smoothly, really, and I had a lot of friends. We'd go out to lunch. All the music teachers had more than one job. Like I taught junior high school in the morning and elementary school in the afternoon, and we would get together for lunch. And one day in 1967, it was May 18th, we were out to lunch, and I got back, and my principals told me that my wife had been trying to get hold of me, and our son Michael had been going to go to lunch with a friend of Helen's and their children, and he had run out and had been hit by a truck, and he was killed instantly. And it was really the most horrible thing that any person could possibly go through. And I still, I know I will always have trouble talking about it. But shortly after, the first thing that we said, when I think probably it was within a day or two after the death, that we were fortunate that we were still young and we would never be able to replace Michael, but we could still have more children. And it wasn't 10 months later that Danielle was born. And Helen has said, when she has written her autobiography, that she was a joy and the cement to our marriage, and it is true. Danielle was, from the beginning, very bubbly, just a real charmer. And she got through school easily. She was a gymnast and a writer. And she moved, when she graduated high school, she had a dean's scholarship to the University of Southern California, and that paid for her whole education. But while she was in college, she was into all kinds of things. One summer, she was majoring in journalism and public relations, and she got not a job, but an internship in St. Louis, and had no income or any way to get around. So she went to St. Louis and worked for this public relations company as an intern, and she had a job wearing a signboard advertising a cleaning company walking through the streets of St. Louis. And she's just that kind of kid. She'd do any any nutty thing. And she is now married, and she lives in San Francisco, and she's married to Drew Sherman, and Drew is just about anything you could wish in a son-in-law. And our other daughter, Marty, is currently living in Boston, and she is an associate professor of composition and music theory at Berklee School of Music, and she has at this time our only grandchild. Her husband is a radio astrophysicist, and he has his PhD from MIT, and works at Harvard University for the Smithsonian Institute Astronomical Society. Just a little bit of background on our daughter Marty, because it's so very interesting to me. Uh, that I went through college and I got my master's degree in 1968 and was so tired of school I could have screamed by the time I got my master's degree. But Marty started probably in preschool, if you want to count that, when she was 3 years old. And she went clear through high school. Her first, well, she actually took 5 years to get through college because she started out at the University of Iowa and finished at the University of Colorado. So 5 years, and then she went, after her 5 years at Colorado, she got a fellowship to study actually arts management at Boston University, where she worked on her bachelor's degree, on her master's degree. She got her master's degree there, and then she taught at the same time and got her PhD at Boston University. Also during that time, she was named composition fellow at Tanglewood, which is a very, very exclusive music camp in the Berkshire Mountains in Massachusetts. And she got her PhD when she was 40 years old. And about the same time started going with her now husband, Charlie, and they got married. And she had our first and so far only grandson, Gideon Michael, and his last name is Katz. Well, it's Epstein Katz is what it is, I guess. And he's presently just over 2 years old and talking and saying all kinds of cute things, and all of this coming from all that education. And Marty is still teaching at Berkeley, and I hope she continues for as long as she wants to. And they seem to be very happy. Marty's in-laws are Boston area people who have always lived around Boston, and they've just recently moved, and so now they're traveling at this time, and who knows where they'll end up. But they're lovely people, and we always look forward to seeing our grandson, of course, and hopefully we'll have more. But I know that Marty won't have any more because she really did have a tough time with Gideon, and he's been worth it though. He's a wonderful child. Towards the end of the school year in 1988, I really suffered pretty severe burnout from fighting all the battles I'd had to fight, and with the school going downhill. And I was going to resign and take a year's leave of absence and then retire. I called my supervisor and informed him that that's what I wanted to do. And he informed me that they were one string teacher short in the system, traveling elementary strings, and that I had always had such a good orchestra and would I consider doing that. And it really sounded very exciting and really kind of neat. So I decided, I didn't decide, I was assigned to teach strings to 2nd through 6th graders. And musically and psychologically and educationally, it was the wisest choice I ever made. I had 10 schools, and all that I taught was strings. And the youngest were 2nd graders. And I'll never forget, because it's still happening, there was a little boy at Fountainelle Elementary School, a 2nd grader. His last name was Orduna, and his first name was John. And he was just a real cut-up at the 2nd grade, but he was playing violin. And I took him aside one day and I said, "John, you know, you come from a very famous family." He says, "Yeah, I know, my uncle was just put in jail and everyone bugs me about it." I said, "No, John, you come from a very famous football family." He says, "Oh, that side of the family." And he and I became great friends. He is currently a junior at Oberlin Conservatory, majoring in bass fiddle. and he'd have been a street kid. So it was really kind of neat. And then after that, I continued on teaching strings, and I taught a few schools where I also had the winds, but not very much. And in 1995, uh, things were just a little bit, there was starting to be quite a bit of government control and intervention, and I was getting a little bit tired of it. And they had just come out with an early retirement system in the state of Nebraska. And one day, when I was just a little bit tired of the whole system, I called up and asked what I would be making if I retired during that summer. And it turned out that if I retired, I would make 10% more than I'd make if I continued teaching. So I decided I had had enough, and I retired from public school teaching. And it was one of the most wisest things I have ever done. I started I did nothing I taught private lessons and played professionally for a year. And then we went to a wedding in Baltimore, one of the Caslow children, and Peter Brodke was there with me, and we were talking about what I was doing. And he said that he has this business where they sell preserved specimens to high schools and colleges throughout the world, and would I be interested in maybe learning a little bit about it and joining the marketing department part-time. So I'm always out for an adventure, so I said sure, and I have since that time been working for Nebraska Scientific in the marketing department, and I work when I want to work, and whatever I make, I just have them take half of it out for taxes, and that way I can teach as many private students as I want. And I'm self-employed there, and the taxes are taken out from Nebraska Scientific, and I don't miss the money, and I have a great time doing everything. And that is what I'm presently doing to this time. I've got 30 private students, and I'm playing professionally whenever I feel like playing, and I would like to play a little bit more, but there's not that much business right now, so I'm happy doing what I'm doing. Another story about when I was teaching, it must have been 1972 or 73. I had a little Chinese boy in the class, and he was one of the first families that managed to get out of China when the people were first trying to get out. And his name was Kevin Yang. And Kevin was just a really cute, chubby little boy. And one time in band, it was 7th grade band, I said, does anyone here know what a metronome is? I was going to teach them a little bit about counting. And Kevin raised his hand. Now this is a little kid who had been speaking English maybe 6 months at the most. And he said, yeah, metronome's a little guy that lives in the middle of the city. A metronome. So I've told this story 1,000 times. 2 weeks ago, I was playing for a wedding in Nebraska City, and this shaved head guy must have been about, maybe 6'1" and weighed 230 or 40 pounds, came up to me and said, I'm Kevin Yang, do you remember me? Needless to say, I remembered him, and he is now assistant to the vice president of AOL, stationed in Washington, D.C. Not a musician, but I understand from after talking about to some of my friends that he had been in all of the activities around Omaha after he got out of junior high school trying to learn how to play jazz. So it's another success story that was really, really cool, especially when I ran into. In closing, I would like to say that this is really one fantastic life that I've led. I couldn't have done any of it without you, Helen. I love you. I say it every day, but I don't get it taped every day. I'm so proud of both my daughters and done it your way and proven to us that your way is the way you should do it. And I think that's totally cool. And Danny, you've been a wonderful daughter. I can't picture any child being more perfect for us than you have been, and I love you. And Marty, I love you. And Helen, once again, I do